Welcome to the Living Louder podcast. Today, we are sharing an interview with a sex offender. So trigger warning, if that is something that you can't hear, I completely understand. I want to share a little bit about my own experience and why I chose to do this video and do this interview. By the way, the interview will be anonymous with the person that I'm interviewing. He is a friend of mine, someone I knew before I went to prison. I was not aware that that was his charge. When I got home, I heard he'd gone to prison. I thought it was for real estate fraud. Turns out that when I called him, he told me exactly what the charge was, and he was very open about what happened, and he actually went to the police and asked for help. So I respect him a lot for that. I have personal experience with this topic, and I'm pretty open about my experience. So I've decided that I'm going to share that, and I think that it may give some insight into why I chose to do this interview. When I got home from prison, my daughter CJ, who was 12 years old, was struggling. Now, I thought that that was just because I had been to prison, which isn't just because, but it's kind of a big deal. She'd been through some hard things. Found out that she had been a victim of a sex offender, and it was pretty serious. We had to work with the Children's Justice Center. CJ was struggling with an eating disorder, and I didn't understand what was underneath that. And when we finally got to it and realized what had happened, it was painful. It was extremely painful for us as parents, probably one of the most painful things we've had to go through, that our daughter had been hurt that way. And for her, I was so proud of her. We went to the Children's Justice Center. She was very open and honest. We chose to be, honesty is our highest value in our home, so we talk about hard things. It's interesting because the perpetrator who was charged and had to spend time in prison, we don't know the outcome of that yet, where he's at in his journey. We've really focused on our daughter and her healing and navigating that, because at the time I worked in drug treatment. So I saw women who had been through this as young children who in their adult years continued to be victims of so many different cult situations. Like same in prison, most of the girls I met in prison had been sexually abused at a young age, and then it continued to be a pattern. So that was one of my concerns. In fact, I talked to a therapist and I said, at the drug treatment center I was at, and I said, I'm so scared for CJ. What do we do? By the way, I have CJ's permission to share this, and she actually wants to come on the podcast. So we'll probably have her on and maybe talk about some of her experiences. She's 18 now, and I'm so proud of her for the things that she's had to go through and how she's navigated that. But I remember talking to the therapist and saying, I fear for my daughter. I need to find a path forward for her. And we talked about how learning to set boundaries, learning to find her power in situations, and understanding what healthy is. One of the other things that I have found for the youth, because I work with the youth, and they are exposed at such a young age to pornography. And it's so challenging for them. I had a young man and a young woman, like 13, 14 years old, that were exposed to this at 5 and 6 years old, and it becomes a habit for them, and they attract things that are really unhealthy. And so in a difficult world, understanding and talking about these things, I think, is important, and how that affects the youth. And then, a lot of the perpetrators or the offenders have also been sexually abused. So it's a complicated topic. And I've chosen to talk about it because it's affected my family in many ways. I have siblings that have been affected by this, and other family members that have been affected by this, and I personally have been. What I want to say is this: if you're a victim of a crime like this, I have so much love and compassion for you, and I believe in you. I believe that there's a path forward. If you're a family member of a perpetrator, I have compassion for you. I'm sorry, this is so painful and difficult. There are some things that we're going to talk about in the interview that could be helpful, like helping your family member take accountability, because that's where the power lies, is through accountability. Nobody can tell someone else when and how to forgive. I can tell you that as I've focused on forgiveness and a desire for the offender in my situation with my daughter to heal, as I've thought about it, I've thought, what would be the best outcome for my family? The number one thing is for my daughter to heal and know who she is. And second, for me, is that I want that offender to find himself while he's in prison. Of course, he has to pay the price, and to have a path out, to become a better man, to come home and use that experience for good. That would be my greatest blessing. I hope that for everyone. There are certain crimes that are really difficult to come back from. And this is one of them. But for family members, for even victims and family members of victims, I decided to have this conversation and to share it on my podcast. And I'm open to any feedback or comments that you want to share. I know I don't have all the answers, but I also know that this has personally affected me. And I believe in redemption for everyone. That doesn't mean that it isn't a long, hard, lifelong, and sometimes maybe eternal process. I think it is for all of us, including myself. So with that information, I will be sharing today this conversation with a sex offender. And I wish you all so much love and happiness and joy and peace. And I know my faith is in Jesus Christ, and through his atonement, all things are possible. I'm going to be having a conversation today with a friend of mine, somebody that I've known for a lot of years. And then there was a period of time that we didn't see each other. And what's kind of interesting about this friendship is that both of us were involved in real estate before I went to prison. When I got home from prison, I heard that this friend of mine had also been to prison. And I was like, wow, how interesting. And I assumed it was in regards to real estate, and it wasn't. It was a charge that a lot of people don't understand, and there's a lot of judgment about this charge. And so we're going to talk about it. And he won't be on camera to protect family and other people, but is so willing to share his story and wants to give people hope. And so he was willing to come here today. So you'll get to see me, and you'll get to hear him and hear both of us. And I think that I'm so grateful. Thank you, James.
Oh, thank you so much, Portia. This is a blessing and a pleasure, and I'm honored.
Thank you. Well, it's interesting. We kind of knew each other back in the crazy real estate days.
Oh, yeah.
How would you describe the crazy real estate days?
Wow. Crazy is definitely one word way to describe it. It was such a huge learning opportunity in so many ways. It's where I gained a lot of my knowledge about business. And that's actually at the time, I don't even know how much you know about what I did, kind of aside from our stuff, but I actually bought and sold, kind of a call, not just real estate, but a small company.
Okay.
At the time too. I sold the mortgage loan processing company that I was running. I sold that to our mutual friend, one of our clients.
Yeah. I did not know that.
Yes, I did. So that was a lot of fun. And that's one of the things that kind of, I don't want to say at that time, but later on, now about what I'm doing, actually, I fall back on those things that I've learned quite a bit.
Yeah, that's amazing. Well, for me, I got involved in real estate deals that were illegal, turns out.
Right?
I didn't think so. The world
at
that time was kind of crazy.
Yeah.
And I always tell people, go watch The Big Short if you want to know what happened.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
Good movie.
It does describe how the whole world was in this kind of a crazy betting thing on real estate. And I was kind of in the thick of that. But when I got home, I started a job at $13 an hour.
There you go.
Yeah. I mean, before I went to prison, as even a photographer, I was making so much more money than that.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. But
I remember I would tell people when I was in prison, working in different places, I remember, I made 40 cents an hour, best, most money I've ever made. And it was just, obviously, a kind of a fun thing, but wow, what an experience even in there, just learning. Yeah, we didn't get paid a ton, but just so many learning opportunities, even with the jobs that we worked in there.
Right. And so, I feel like my prison experience absolutely prepared me for what I do now.
Oh, 100% agree. Yeah, same here.
Yeah. But at the time, the last thing I wanted to do was go to prison. I didn't want to go. I was scared to go. I felt like it was a destruction of my life and any identity I had. And so, but what it really was an opportunity to figure out who I really am.
Yeah. One of the stories that I share with people about, kind of what, not so much about what led me to prison, but what I learned while I was there was I learned about who I professed to be, but then who I really was. And there was such a huge gap. Right. Between that. And so I learned about why was there a gap, and then what can I do about it? How can I fill that gap?
Right.
I professed to be this individual, and I had all of the, outward actions and everything, but none of the inward beliefs.
Right.
And so going to prison really gave me the opportunity. I took that opportunity rather to learn about who I really was, who I wanted to be, and how to become that person. And now, the phrase I use is I love life and I love who I am and I love what I'm doing, where I'm going, who I'm doing it with. It's such a huge, huge difference. Now my outward appearance and my outward actions are a direct reflection of who I am inside.
That is so powerful. I always say, I don't care so much about what anyone else thinks. I care about what I think. And when I looked in the mirror before, I was really good at trying to please the world, but deep inside, I knew I wasn't lined up with my values.
Yeah.
And so my addiction was to drugs. I struggled with an addiction to prescription drugs for years. It definitely affected my judgment. I'm curious if you struggled with the sex addiction.
Yes, I did. I struggled with sex addiction. So surpriser. Yes, I went to prison on a sex offense. But here's what's interesting, because when I first started going to 12-step and various addiction recovery programs, not just LDS 12-step, but even Narcotics Anonymous, although I had no drug addictions, but I wanted to learn. So I went to NA, I went to SA, Sexaholics Anonymous.
Right.
I went to the actual Big Blue book, 12-step addiction recovery and everything. I learned, Portia, that my underlying addiction that feeds every single one of my other addictions is pride. And that for me was eye-opening. Once I finally learned that about myself and started exploring that, and it took time and it was hard.
Right.
It was so hard to look inside, accept who I was, and I didn't like it. And so once I learned about myself and my pride, and I still am extremely prideful, and it is still my underlying addiction.
Right.
But learning how that fed everything, sex addiction, food addiction,
right,
business addiction, workaholics, addiction, all of that, learning about how my pride really affected me and still affects me is so eye-opening.
Right. Right. And I get that. I totally get that. One of the things that I admired most about you when I called you when I got out of prison, because I was actually, my husband got hit with a charge, which is unfortunate because I used his credit, but they can wrap someone else up.
They do.
Yeah. And so he ended up getting charged. He didn't go to prison. They knew that he really was a bystander.
Yeah.
But nonetheless, with a fraud charge, when you're in the accounting world,
right,
it's pretty tough. And I knew that you'd had a lot of success in business. And so I'm thinking, how have you had that kind of success? So when I talked to you, I was like, so you went in on mortgage fraud? And you're like, nope, I went in on sex offense. You were very direct about it.
Oh yeah.
And I even tried to give you a pass, like, well, I get it that sometimes people, you're like, no,
this was my issue. Oh yeah. It was my fault.
And so that is so powerful. And it's very difficult because I have family members that reach out to me that say, my son got caught up, but he really didn't know what he was doing. Are they doing their kid a favor by telling, how important is it to own the charge or what you did? How important is that?
Everything is choice, right? Mm-hmm. Whether you choose to own it or you choose to not to, and then what are the consequences of those choices? And so that's the way I look at it. It's okay, here's the options. If you choose to own it, then it gives you the opportunity, provides you with the opportunity to learn. What can you learn from that?
Right.
And on the opposite side, if you say, I was victim, then what can you learn from that? Not a lot.
Right.
And so, and that's, I even have a lot of friends still. I'll share a quick story with you about a friend of mine. I knew him in prison, knew him for many years after prison, and he had been to prison twice. Mm-hmm. And both times, it wasn't me. I was framed, type story that we've all heard, right? And then finally, 20 years later, during a board hearing, to every single person's surprise, he said, you know what? I need to own up to this. That was me both times. And it changed him.
Right.
That was about, 2 or 3 years ago. And he is a complete different person now.
So there's so much power in owning it. And it's so scary too.
It is.
It's scary.
Absolutely.
For me, I see people in prison that are they look really tough and really strong, but deep down, the biggest fear we all carry is to truly own what we did because we know that we hurt the people we love the most.
Exactly.
And that's a painful thing to accept.
It really is. And that's a hard thing. One of the things that I learned, just throughout my entire life and especially lately, is we tend to hurt those that we love the most. Right. Why? Because we trust them. We have this relationship with them. And so we're so honest with them. And sometimes that honesty. So kind of, my story, when I confessed to my now ex-wife, but wife at that time about, my actions, it was so hard, for both. It was the scariest thing I've ever done in my life.
Right.
And yeah, I ended up in prison and I deserved to be in prison. I was absolutely rightfully there and it scared the crap out of me. But once I started owning up even more and learning about who I was, and then, yeah, even in prison, people ask me, okay, well, what are you here for? And I was honest.
It's a scary thing to say in prison.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah,
it was.
being a sex offender in prison is no joke.
It's the bottom of the barrel. When I was honest about it, but I didn't share the details, I started gaining respect. And this is what's interesting, Portia. I know you did federal time and didn't do any time here in Utah. And Utah is very different than many other states.
Right.
But I was able to live in many areas that a lot of other guys or individuals that are in sex offense couldn't.
Right.
Because of the way I carried myself. I wasn't, yes, I was a prideful person even after, I learned about that. But the way that I was a confident individual, yet understood how to interact with others. I lived in many areas that a lot of people on my charges could not live.
Right.
And it was really fun in a lot of ways because I got to learn so much from those individuals and made so many good friends.
Right. Right. So if you've got a kid, and when I say kid, I mean 30 years old, 40 years old, whatever.
Right. Yeah, kid compared to us, right? Exactly.
But still, because there are so many people now that go in on sex offense, whether it's, a 19-year-old that sex with a 16-year-old or a 17-year-old, or you hurt someone in, it could be a variety of things. It could be, those charges can.
It's so broad.
It's very broad.
Yeah.
And it sticks with you. It's not something like you could easily think there's no hope for me. And yet I've gone and spoke at the transitional housing that the church has for people that are getting out of prison that are sex offenders, so they can't go to the regular chapel.
Yeah, I've been to that ward many times. I used to attend that ward when I first got out.
Right, right. And there's people there. The power for them is to accept that, I made this mistake and there's consequences to that, but there is a future for me. There is a way forward. What do you tell the parent? Because I get parents that call me and tell me my kid was done dirty. It's not fair. They looked at all the wrong things. Because the charges are going to be twisted around. They're not,
course, always.
Mine were too. I get it.
Always.
You just own what you did 100%. That's your part. And the parents aren't helping the kids by telling them you're a victim. They just are.
Here's my advice to them, and I talk with a lot of those, whether it be the individual that has the charges, or the victim, or the parents or family members. Here's my advice around all of that, regardless of the state's consequences, the charges, the way that the prison is run, because every one of us know that the system's broken.
Right.
There's no argument there.
Right.
So
for sure.
Here's my advice to them: don't be so concerned about I was wronged.
Right.
Okay. And oh my gosh, I did X. I'm there for Y amount of time. Don't be so concerned about that. Be concerned with what can I do from here? How can I move forward? Here's the phrase I like to use. There are two people that come out of prison, two types of people. Those that come out bitter and those that come out better.
Right.
And here's the difference. One letter. You come out bitter if it's based on I.
Right.
Okay. It's about, oh my gosh, I was wronged.
Right.
Or E, everyone else. How can I use this to help myself and everyone else around me? Come out a better person. So regardless of whether you agree or not with the consequence, what can you do to come out better from that?
I love that.
And that's what the family members can help the individual, their loved one, focus on.
It's hard. I understand if my son was in and he had a sex offense and I knew that he was going to be treated poorly in prison, or it would be, or
he's going to struggle getting a job for the rest of his life because now he has a tag on him.
Right. And yet you've had so much success in your career. And because you just started, you didn't look at the barrier. You started looking at what can I do within the circle of influence that I have?
Yeah.
Who can I reach out to? What can I do? I want to jump into this too. So for me, I know that I cannot use one half of the pain pill. With the sex offense, because the world would say pornography, masturbation, none of that matters. For me, to me, that's a relapse.
It is.
Yeah.
100%. And I've been there. I have relapsed. So it's the story of the pilot that flies close to the trees versus one that doesn't. I'm going to give a very quick synopsis of the story. So there was a pilot being interviewed for a position one time. And the position, I can't remember, crop duster, I don't know. And the interviewer asked the pilot, hey, how close can you fly to the trees? And one pilot said, well, I can get so close, I can almost shave them. There's the other pilot that says, I will stay as far away as I can. And that's me.
Yeah.
I am the pilot who stays far away from the trees because I know my addiction. I know my triggers.
Right.
And even when I don't feel like I might be triggered, I know them. And the other thing that goes along with that, Portia, and so since coming out of prison, I've been so blessed. I met an amazing woman. We've been married. We're coming up on 5 years now. I got out in January of 2020. We've been married for almost 5 years come March of 26. And we are so open. I will tell her when I relapse. I will tell her when I'm close to relapsing. I will tell her when I feel triggered. And it's vulnerable. It's very interesting. When we met, our very first conversation was about Brene Brown and vulnerability, and how it's scary, but you'll never die from it.
Right.
And so that's the thing. I will tell her, I'm like, hey, vulnerability, I got to tell you something. And it has to be, and my thing is it has to be within 24 hours, and even better if I do it within a couple of hours.
Okay.
So for example, she's traveling and she's traveling for 2 weeks. This has happened in the past. She's traveling for 2 weeks and I catch myself in some very bad moments. And whether I've almost or I have made the bad decision, I will call her, and it's scary for me and it's in tears. But I'm like, I've got to tell you, and this is not going to be great, but let's just talk through it. And she is so supportive because she knows how hard that is for me. And a lot of times her question is, okay, well, let's just walk through your thought process. What led to that? What were you trying to accomplish?
Right.
And she's not angry at all. And so that's a lot of my advice to family members and others as well, whether it be, something from 5 years ago or something from 5 minutes ago.
Right.
Be loving, be kind.
Right. Yeah, because then you encourage truth. In our family, honesty is the highest value, which means that I have to be willing to hear hard things. It's not, I have parents all the time that are like, I wish that my kid would talk to me. And I'm like, can they trust you to talk to you?
Yeah.
Like if my daughter vapes or does something, and does she know when she explains it to me that I can say, hey, well, let's talk about it. What's that doing for you? How do you feel? I want her to succeed more than I get the fear. Because a lot of people would be afraid, right? A spouse would be afraid. What? You did what?
Right.
This is going to lead to this? But being willing to have that trust between the two of you, that's really beautiful.
It's actually very interesting because when I got out of prison, I reconnected with another friend that I knew before prison, and she and I had dated before prison. And so we didn't date again after, but we became really close. And so we talked about things. And then when I met my current wife, the very difference between the gal I used to date was when I would tell her things, she would listen and she'd be like, okay, great. I don't ever want to hear that again. So don't do it again.
Right.
Versus my wife that I ended up marrying, she's like, tell me more. Help me to understand what you're going through.
Right. So it's not about her. She's not taking it personal.
Exactly.
She understands that it's your struggle and your weakness, and it doesn't define her at all.
And she loves me for that because I'm open with her about it.
You've employed that same practice with career.
Yeah, exactly. The place that I'm at now, the company that I work with, I was very upfront. Actually, it's actually interesting. The way that I got my job that I'm working now was from an individual that I knew before prison. And we actually saw each other again in prison when he was a volunteer. And I was, he was wearing white shirt and tie and I was wearing white pajamas. We had reconnected. And then so when I got out, we reconnected again. And talked through all of that. And he presented me to the other ones that made the decisions. And he's like, listen, I've known James for years. I want to make sure that, I will validate him. And so all the other ones had interviewed me and everything. And yeah, they were trepidatious, but my friend was able to, convince them, hey, let's take a chance on him. And it's actually been so amazing since, because now I've been in leadership positions. I've helped them make a lot of changes and grow a lot. And they are 100% behind me. Every single one of them, the executives and the board members know my background and they fully support me.
It's so amazing. I want to talk about, also, we're members of the same church, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. I have been so blessed as a member of the church. They have supported our family truly. When people say, how could you be a religious person or be a member of the church and go to prison? And I want to say, I'm pretty sure the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints believes in repentance and the power of the atonement of Jesus Christ.
Definitely.
And that absolutely applies to everybody. It doesn't mean that there aren't man's consequences.
Oh, for sure.
And in your case,
there should be.
Yeah, and there should be.
Yeah.
Because truly, not just there should be for the victims, but there should be for us.
Yeah.
Because it allows us the dignity of turning our lives around by facing those consequences. There's power in walking through that. For you, part of the consequences, I believe you were excommunicated from the church.
I was, yes.
What was that like for you?
So I'm actually so grateful for it. I want to first and foremost say how much I was glad that happened. So I want to share a little bit more about that story, how that happened, and then what's going on right now. So yes, my parents are converts to the church. I grew up in a part-member family. Not all of us are members. I grew up being able to visit many churches, many Christian churches, and many world churches for years, and I loved it. And so I was able to gain my own testimony of the truthfulness of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. When I went to prison, I questioned everything.
Sure.
I questioned myself. I questioned my beliefs. I questioned God. And I went through lots and lots of learning opportunities. But what got to the point to where once I was able to develop such a strong testimony of my faith and of God and his existence and the scriptures, the Bible, the Book of Mormon, Doctrine and Covenants, Pearl of Great Price, and everything. I felt so all in. We've heard that phrase. So convicted, Portia. It got to the point where I'm like, I'm going to say my prayers on my knees morning and night. And Portia, I was made fun of.
Really?
I was ridiculed. And you know what? I didn't care. It got to the point to where after so long, people started just completely respecting me for it.
It's so cool.
And I'm going to bring you full circle to my story, but I'm going to sidetrack to another story really quick. So a couple of friends of mine went to a dorm in a section in prison, and they continued a tradition that a bunch of us had started. They started a prayer group in that dorm. And it started off with 2 individuals. At the end of their time in that dorm, every single person in that dorm except one ended up joining that prayer group. And that was powerful. And the individuals in that prayer group were taking turns praying. Did not matter what their
religion
belief was.
Yeah,
exactly.
So beautiful.
It united them.
I feel that happened in prison.
It was
so beautiful.
So neat. So for me, yes. So when I confessed to my wife, and we confessed to our bishop, I confessed to my bishop, and I told him, I know I'm going to be excommunicated.
Right.
And he said, James, he said, don't worry about that right now. Let's just take things one step at a time. And that phrase, one step at a time, had become my mantra and still is for the rest of my life. So yes, it was interesting because he was my bishop at the time. He then became my stake president while I was incarcerated and worked through my excommunication. Now is called, I can't remember the exact phrase now, losing your membership.
Sure.
Council. But for me, I wanted that because I knew that I had not treated my testimony the way I should. I knew that I was not listening to the Spirit, to the Holy Ghost, the way that I should. And I wanted to learn what it was like to start recognizing those things, to basically start over.
Yeah.
And so that for me was my opportunity to start over.
Right.
And so since then, I got out of prison in 2020. I got off parole in January of this year, so in 2025, and then had gotten rebaptized. And oh my gosh, Portia, it is the most tremendous experience for me. And I hold strong to that now. And my wife and I are so much looking forward to first half of next year when I can get my priesthood and when I can get the priesthood and blessings restored to me and go back to temple and we can get sealed.
Oh,
and those are things now that are...
You need to invite me and I'll come take your picture.
Oh my gosh. Oh, we're going to take you up on that.
Do.
Thank you.
I would love to do that for you. So I'm so happy for you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Blessed for sure. More than we deserve.
And then you go back into the prison and you help people and give people hope.
I am. Yeah. This will be coming up in a couple of weeks. It'll be my first time going back. But even notwithstanding going back to prison to go help, I've been involved in several of the local communities around here, teaching, facilitating classes. I have, I know for sure, without even counting, over 200 contacts in my phone of individuals from prison. I talk with someone at least 5 or 6 times a week. I actually called a buddy that's out of the state that we met in prison. I called him on my way here and was just catching up with him. And so I love, we know when we spend that time together in prison, especially if you go through therapy and specifically sex offender treatment therapy, and you learn how to recognize the triggers, the signs. You can call each other out.
Yeah.
And that for me is gold, because there's a circle of friends of us, and we do that to each other. We absolutely call each other out, and it's so good because we hold each other accountable.
Yeah, absolutely. We do the same thing. And if you don't have friends that are willing to tell you the truth, you need to get some, because
Yes,
no one cares about you. They will tell you the truth. And including my partner, my husband, I don't want him to lie to me.
Yeah.
Like I'll go speak and I'll be like,
of all people.
I don't want you to lie to me. I don't want you to tell. I want you to be in my corner and cheer me on. But when I'm struggling, I want you to be willing to tell me in a loving way. And he does that for me. And so do my friends. And I'm grateful for that. I learned that in prison.
Yes.
Which is so crazy.
Of all places.
Right. I remember I'd lived my life trying to people please and business this and that. And then I get to prison and there was this gal, her name was Val, and she was doing life, and she had been down for 20 years. She looked pretty scary, pretty solid, bigger gal. And one time she asked me if I wanted to go do something, and I started making excuses, and she goes, "Hey, Loud," she goes, "don't give all your power away. Just tell me what you feel and what you think."
I remember reading that in your book. Yeah. I loved that.
Yeah. Wow. And she's like, and so then I was like, yeah, I don't want to do that.
Yeah. How powerful.
Just tell people how you feel.
I had a cellie that was pretty similar. So I was one of my weaknesses prior to prison was just being, passive aggressive, which is a very normal trend for those that commit a sex offense, right?
Okay.
And so when I learned that about myself, I remember I had a cellie, and one time I can't remember what the situation was, but I started like making excuses for myself. And he looks at me and he goes, "James, you don't need to excuse yourself." He goes, "Tell me the answer, and that's it. That's all I need." He's like, "Don't validate yourself and don't invalidate yourself." Right. And so now, and I use that in business. I have his voice in my head a lot of times. Yeah. For example, someone says, "Hey, James, can you do such and such?" And I will, in my email or text or phone call or whatever it is, I'll say, "No, because," and then I stop, because I'm like,
me too.
I don't need to tell them why. No, I don't want to. That's why. That's not going to work for me.
Right.
That's a great response. That's not going to work.
Well, I won't do that.
I won't do that. Or even
I won't say I can't, because I probably can, but I won't.
And here's the thing. And this actually even came up recently, as of 2 weeks ago. I was asked to judge. So here's the thing. So one of the things not to divulge too much information, I was asked to be involved with something that on a normal basis, I could do very comfortably, and I would love it. But as I thought about it, I'm like, this may not be the best situation for me, because it may be viewed in a not so great light.
Sure.
And so I replied to this individual who knows my background.
Right.
I applied to the individual, and I almost started talking about, because of my background, this and that. And I stopped and I just said, "This isn't going to be the best thing for me right now, but let me tell you who could work for that."
Yeah. That's called not giving your power away.
Exactly.
I love it so much. So my very first experience with this was when I was like about halfway in my prison sentence, and I was really trying to get, take some ownership of my life. Like I had created the government into the biggest, most powerful, rotten people, because they had done me dirty.
Oh yeah.
I was so done dirty, and they were terrible. And I
give them all the power.
I felt like I was very imprisoned, right? Yeah. And it was this righteous indignation. I remember it was during the Trump and Hillary Clinton election when I was thinking, those two people, it was so bad. They're dishonest, and they're worse than me. And I remember sitting around,
and rightfully so. I mean, you have a right to feel that way.
Yeah. Except that there was a woman sitting there next to me that had been down a lot longer than me, who was also a fairly smart person in on a white collar charge. And when I looked at her, I went, "I don't think you've been stuck for like 10 years. I don't want to get stuck. I got to find my way out." And so I decided to step away from the news and do some meditation and start to walk and think about it. And it took, honestly, I learned more from the drug dealers. I know this sounds crazy, but like us white collar people, probably you may have found this too, but it's like all of a sudden I'm like, one of my really good friends who's been on the podcast, Macy, she's like, "Portia, when you commit crimes, you go to prison."
Right? I know. That's the natural consequence. And it should be, right? We deserve to go there.
So, but why am I so mad at everybody else? And so But I remember the officer called me in one day. He's like, "Hey, Louder, why don't you come sign your pay sheet?" Well, it was like $7, right? And I don't give a garbage about that. Like, I don't care.
Yeah.
You can't
$7. Guess what? I can buy 3 noodles with that.
Right. So I was like, I'm not signing it. I just don't want to come over to the office and sign it.
Yeah.
So the next day I went in, he's like, "Why didn't you come over and sign your pay sheet?" And I started making an excuse. I was like, "Oh," and he goes, "Hey, Louder, you're better than that. Just own it." And I go, "Yeah, I didn't want to. I didn't care."
Yeah, exactly.
There you go. And that's when I realized I'm not giving my power away. I'm not going to make excuses. I'm going to own it. And so I will do the same. When somebody sends me a text and asks me to do something, I'll go to make an excuse and I'll stop and go,
I don't want to.
I don't want to, or I won't do that.
Yeah.
Because a lot of times it's like,
that.
I won't do that.
I like that. I like that a lot. And
that's not going to work.
I am actually going to start using those phrases. Thank you. I love learning from others. It's so good.
Too.
Yeah.
So I want to give people hope. I want to give people hope that may have a sex offense. I want to give families a hope. Good. I want to even talk to the victims and say, there's hope for you.
Yes.
And so I'm curious, like, what can you share that would give people hope?
Yeah. And I'm going to kind of speak to each group that you talked about. I'm going to first speak to the perpetrators, myself.
Right.
And then to the families of the perpetrators.
Okay.
And then to the victims. So to the perpetrators as far as hope goes. And I know I said this before, but I'm going to emphasize it. Own it. Mm-hmm. Own it and then move forward. How can you learn and grow? And that's an individual basis.
Right.
I can't tell you what's going to work for you specifically. I can't be a generalist.
Right.
Okay. But I've had so many, individuals, therapists will, have me come speak to their groups and things like that. And now it's one-on-one, I can sit and say, okay, tell me your situation and kind of give them some thoughts, but at the same time, it's very individualistic. So when you specifically own it, and then figure out how can you make that work for you and become better.
Right.
That's when you can start learning hope. For the loved ones and the friends around us.
Right.
Help them own it. The best thing you can do for them is to be in their corner, but not as a
co-signer.
Right. I love that. Yeah, I'm not going to co-sign this line. How many times have I heard that in phrase that I'm not co-signing that? Yeah. Not as a co-signer, and think of it as the person in the arena, right? Back to Brene Brown.
Right.
Okay. If you're the person in the arena and you're the actual coach for them, what are you going to do to help them get back out there and fight? And so that's the thing. You got to be able to lift them to the next level, encourage them. And that's hard because really hard. You want to love them, but it's tough love. Hey, parents, we do that with our kids all the time. We need to do that with everyone else. Lastly, to the victims. Oh my gosh. And this is so difficult, Portia, because we want to help them feel validated. But I'm going to share a story, not my own, but a friend of mine that has impacted me ever since. When he and his wife were interviewing, and his victim was his daughter. Mm-hmm. When he and his wife were interviewing a therapist, and he said, I found the right one. And they asked the therapist the same question. Okay. What can we do for our family to heal? Because there were obvious reasons. There were so many difficulties going on.
Right.
And finally, he found the right therapist when the therapist said, as soon as you accept the Savior and accept his atonement, that's when healing begins.
Right.
And people listening, they may believe differently than us. They may not even be Christian, and that's okay.
Right.
But I'm telling you, for me, and I so strongly believe in Jesus Christ and his healing power.
Right, me too.
Whether you believe in him as your Savior or whether you believe in him as an example, it's the same thing. It's more powerful, obviously, if you believe in him as your Savior. But if you can accept what he can do to help us heal, then as a victim, when you forgive the individual, I don't know if my victim has forgiven me or not. But here's the thing. When victims can forgive, not forget, but forgive, and let's talk about that. What does forgiveness mean? It means let go of the power of that individual holds over you.
Right.
So when they can forgive the power and the individual that perpetrated against them, that releases that power, and then they can continue growing and moving on as well.
Right.
I do not want to negate the lifelong impact that it has on them.
Right.
That I can't even start touching
on
that. But my hope is for the victims to be able to move forward in a space and a place where they feel comfortable and confident. And that's whether they're a victim, like, from a sex offense or from drugs or from theft or murder. And I know we both know all of those individuals.
We do, yeah.
But for me, it's just such a powerful thing. But it's so hard, and I recognize that.
So I have two things that came up for me as you were sharing. One, I remember when I was in the first part of my prison sentence and I was in that phase of being so angry, and I called home and I was talking to Chad and I was telling him what they did was so wrong. Everyone knows it. Even my boss at work knows what they did is so wrong. And he stopped me and he goes, Portia, I love you so much and this isn't helping you. And to me, that was, I'm in your corner, but you're hurting yourself. He didn't tell me, well, you need to take ownership. That wouldn't help. I had to come to that on my own. But what he did was he said, this isn't helping you, And for me, I had to really take a look at what is the outcome I want. Do I want to leave an empowered person? Do I want a future? Because as long as I hold on to this story that the government did me dirty, the only way that I get to move forward is when they come and apologize. I've given them all the power.
And guess what? They're not going to. Right?
It's a long time in my cell to get that apology. And why would I give them the power to give it to me?
Yeah.
Why would I say, when you come and apologize, then I'll be okay? I got to find my way forward. So I love that you brought up the way families can support their loved ones. Don't co-sign.
Yeah.
Love them, help them, but also recognize they'll find their way forward and they can. The other thing that I think is interesting, it's so difficult for us to tell a victim to forgive, because what they would say is, we can't even say that.
Yeah.
We can't tell. I can't, we can never do that. But here's it. I will illustrate with this story. So I was watching this thing on Netflix, and this woman whose son had been brutally murdered in California, she was very angry. And the victimizer, the man that killed her son, she wrote impact letters, and he was sentenced to death. And she was there the day that he was put to death. And she said that the worst thing that happened to me was that I didn't feel any better. I felt worse after he was put to death. It was like I kept thinking, I'll finally be freed when he's put to death. Yeah. He killed my son. She said the only thing that worked for me, she says, I started really digging deep. Like, why am I so angry? Why am I so unhappy? She said, then I realized I've got to understand what this man, what he was like. So she started serving on death row. She found a way to go back into the prison.
Gosh.
She started serving on death row, and she has become a huge advocate to eliminate the death penalty. And she said, wow, I so wish that man could have lived so that I would have had the opportunity to get to the place I am now, so that I could have forgiven him as long as he was alive. She goes, I have forgiven him. But like, as I've gotten to know these individuals and understand their stories, my whole life has become in their service. And I feel that when you are a victim, you have this opportunity. And I was just speaking with Manny. You got to see Manny.
Yeah.
You guys were
amazing.
Such a cool man. Manny's mother got pregnant when she was 12 and had him when she was 13. She was crack addicted. They never had a home. She had abusive men in her life, and he was put in foster care at age 7 and was tossed around in different foster homes and ended up in juvenile detention and then, prison and on and on. I've never heard Manny speak ill of his mother.
Oh my gosh, that's amazing.
And when he came to my ward, he spoke in Sunday school, and we had people say, how have you been able to forgive your mom? Like, you didn't have a fair shake. And he goes, well, why would it help me not to?
I love that response. What an amazing man.
Yeah.
Wow.
He said, why would it help me not to? And he said, and isn't that what Jesus asks us to do? And so again, Manny has found a way to use everything hard in his life to empower him. And I think a victim can do that too. But I also want to recognize that it's painful, and we understand that. And if you ever get to that place as a victim where you're really able to forgive the victimizer, then you are an incredible human being.
I think the most incredible. Yeah.
But that's the only thing we can say. There's not, and if you choose not to, that's okay too. That's your right.
Can I share a couple of stories that come to mind? So President Hinckley, years and years ago, and this story has stuck with me ever since. So he had, a lady that came to him, and she was abused by her father.
Right.
And I don't know the details, but she struggled with forgiving him.
Right.
And his response to her was, "That's okay. You don't have to forgive him. Just hold a place in your heart to allow that to happen if and when it can."
Right.
And that to me was impactful.
Right.
And the other stories, and there's a group in Australia. I watched an incredible documentary several months back, a group in Australia, and they facilitate very, very special, situations where the victimizer and the victim can get together. The story that I watched was a gentleman. He was driving drunk, and he killed, I think it was 5.
Oh my goodness.
And 5 children in an accident. And now was sentenced to life. He will never get out.
Right.
But the father of 2 of the children were his, and then 3 were his nieces and nephews.
Yeah.
After several years, he got to the point, kind of like you mentioned, he wanted to learn why. Yeah, he was angry. He was bitter for every reason he should be. But
Right.
he went back and he started talking to this individual. They facilitated it.
Mhm.
Start talking, and now they're like best friends.
Oh, man.
It's incredible. And so just stories like that they're few and far between, and they're so inspiring and so special. Not everybody can do that.
No.
And it's okay. And it's okay.
Right.
Absolutely. But those I feel are very touching,
Right.
and inspirational when they can do that. The story of the bishop here in Utah years and years ago, Let It Go. That's the book, written about it. And I read that book while I was in prison.
Yeah.
It was actually interesting. I met my ex-wife's father in prison.
Wow.
I had heard about him
Mhm.
from her, and there were not good stories.
Sure.
And we met, and it was a very interesting meeting. But through several of those meetings, we became really close. And to this day, this is the individual I mentioned out there.
Wow.
He's my ex-father-in-law.
Yeah.
And to this day, we still stay in touch.
Wow.
Yeah.
I think that with God, all things are possible.
Absolutely.
So, and
Totally agree.
just want, there are going to be consequences in this life. And I know that about myself, right? I missed certain years with my children that I'll never get back.
Oh, for sure.
I get some crazy comments. I get so many supportive comments, but sometimes I get crazy ones.
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah.
People say, what you did was deplorable. You'll never be able to make it right with your children. You have ruined their lives. And I'm like, that's a really sad future, for my children, But I do know there's consequences of the choices that I made. And I know that the best thing that I can do is get up and do everything I can to make it right and move forward and live a meaningful life. And I think that's all any of us can do, no matter what. And there are a lot of bias. Sometimes I think if you're a sex offender, you're like a modern day leper. That is what people have to face. But I get a lot of people that say
it's the
scarlet letter. I mean, felony is, but even more when you have the sex offender, it's even further. But I chose not to let that define me. I have not had a hard time getting a job. I came home and I spoke very openly, and you've done the same. You've chose not to let that affect you. You've chose to acknowledge it, accept it, and move forward. And that is beautiful. And you give people hope. I actually, like you say, I called you because I looked up to you for your success in business, but even more, I look up to you for your success in life.
Well, thank you, Portia. I really appreciate it. And I look up to you for how much of an advocate you are for everybody on all sides, an advocate for change for good. Let's figure out how to become better people and not bitter people, regardless of where you are in, the incarceration process, whether you're a victim, a family member, or a perpetrator, or have friends who are. That's something that I really, really love you and respect you for, and how much you are an advocate to help individuals. So thank you for that example.
Thank you. Thank you so much for joining us again on the Living Louder podcast. We'll be back next week.